Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. I do want to get into some of his options because I think even since the news broke on, I guess it was Monday afternoon, a lot has changed. And so in terms of what schools would be best, listen, I think the first one is the most obvious one. I think it's got to be USC, right? Now, I do think that behind the scenes, there was probably some angst or frustration with Lincoln Riley. I do think they were probably not very happy that he went to the podium the night of that Bedlam game and said, I am not taking the LSU coaching job, only to a couple hours later take the USC coaching job. But at the end of the day, Caleb Williams' dad said to Yahoo's Pete Thamel that the biggest factor in terms of what the next school is going to be is if they can develop his son into an NFL caliber quarterback. And if they can develop him into a guy that can reach his potential as not only an NFL caliber quarterback, because I think he could come play for Torres, he could come play for Aaron Torres at whatever. And I think I could get him to the NFL. But the question is, who is going to develop him into that potential number one overall draft pick, which is where he was trending under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. And so when you think about who is the best place to potentially develop him into that, I think the answer is probably still Lincoln Riley at USC. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, does Caleb Williams consider Lincoln Riley? Does he consider USC? Now, again, I know there were bridges burned, and I do think there's something to be said about the fact that USC actually has a really good starting quarterback coming back next season in Jackson Dart. USC had Keaton Slovis. He struggled. He was injured. Jackson Dart steps in. Jackson Dart plays well. Keaton Slovis transfers, and I think Jackson Dart thought that he had this job. And I will say, I think Lincoln Riley probably would have been happy going into next season with Jackson Dart. But when you have the chance to bring in Caleb Williams, you have to take advantage. And so I think USC is the first obvious one. The second one, I'll tell you this. I don't know if it would be my first choice if I was Caleb Williams in his camp and his father. But I was told, even before Caleb Williams entered the portal, I got a text from somebody that kind of lives in that quarterback, you know how you see the quarterback camps on TV and you see the guy, somebody that lives in that space texted me probably an hour or two before Caleb Williams officially entered the portal. He said, hey, I'm just telling you, I'm hearing Caleb Williams is snooping around in the portal, and if he goes, here are a couple schools that he would consider. And the first one was the Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm not saying if I was Caleb Williams or if I was his dad after what Kirby Smart did to Justin Fields, that Georgia would be my first choice. But I do think it makes sense. First of all, Stetson Bennett, fifth-year guy. I think there's some confusion. I think he technically has another year of eligibility left. But we saw Stetson Bennett against Alabama. Even if he has eligibility left, we saw what he is capable of. We saw what his limitations are, and you know if you're Georgia, if you don't get by Bama this year, and even if you do, you still got to deal with Bryce Young next year. On top of that, JT Daniels was a 5-star, hasn't worked out, for whatever reason, couldn't get the job back after he lost it to Stetson Bennett. And then, on top of that, you have two other quarterbacks in that room that have yet to establish themselves. One is a kid named Brock Vandagriff, Ironically, he was actually committed to Oklahoma at one point. Decommits, goes to Georgia. That's what allows Caleb Williams to go to Oklahoma. And then they have another 4-star named Carson Beck committed in 2022. And so I bring it up because Georgia could have as many as 4 guys in that QB room. But let's be honest. If Stetson Bennett doesn't get over Alabama here in a couple days, and even if he does, you still got to come back next year and go through Bryce Young at some point. And so do you want to try to do it with Stetson Bennett? Or, again, if you have the chance to bring in Caleb Williams, the potential number 1 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, that's probably a move that you have to make no matter who it upsets and no matter who it pisses off. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's fair. I am saying this is the world that we live in now. And so I think Georgia is a real player. Because keep in mind, if you're Caleb Williams, I think your argument for Georgia is kind of simple. You're like, dude, I'm a baller. Even Kirby Smart can't screw me up. I'll go there And I will say, if the goal is to both win at the college level as well as be developed for the NFL, then I think Georgia makes a lot of sense, right? Because you know that no matter who they lose in the offseason to the NFL draft, the defense is going to be awesome. The skill position guys are going to be awesome. The O-line is going to be awesome. The run game is going to be awesome. And the one thing that they've never really had under Kirby Smart, and some of it is Kirby Smart's fault, again with Justin Fields, again with JT Daniels, is that super elite quarterback. And Caleb Williams, you could be that guy. And oh, by the way, maybe if you don't win the national championship this year, then you're the hero because you came in and you were the guy that put everything over the top for Georgia under Kirby Smart next year, when, again, you're going to have to get through Bryce Young to win a national championship. On top of that, I think there's some other schools that make sense as well. First of all, I talked about development. I talked about the fact that Caleb Williams' dad said, look, number one priority is developing us for the pros. Well, I think you can argue there isn't a single better quarterback developer in college football than Lane Kiffin. Now, you could fight for Ryan Day. You could fight for Lincoln Riley. You could fight for Steve Sarkisian. I wouldn't argue. But at the same time, let's call a spade here. Lane Kiffin, he's goofy. He says weird stuff. He does weird stuff. He tweets weird stuff, rat poison, whatever. Well, guess what? Lane Kiffin, when he was at Alabama, 4 years, 4 different quarterbacks, won the SEC in each year. The best quarterback he coached at Alabama, Jalen Hurts, had his best season at Alabama when Lane Kiffin was there. On top of that, he gets to Ole Miss. There's kind of this battle. John Rice Plumlee had actually played a bunch before Lane Kiffin gets there. He comes in. Matt Corral wins the job. Matt Corral might be the first quarterback off the board. We talked about him a ton on Monday's show. And so if you're looking strictly for quarterback development, I think Lane Kiffin makes sense. I think the big question is there enough around you to really feature you the way that Georgia could, the way that USC could, and, of course, the way that Oklahoma could if you decide to stay there. We're going to talk about Oklahoma in a second. I think it's the same vein for a couple other SEC schools that could be in the mix really quickly. LSU, Caleb Williams almost committed to LSU out of high school. This was back when Joe Brady was at LSU. And LSU kind of needs a quarterback. As I record here, I'm recording right before this Texas Bowl that LSU is going into with 0 available scholarship quarterbacks. Now, Garrett Nussmeier is eligible to play, but if they play him, they have to burn a red shirt. And then on top of that, LSU has a 5-star named Walker Howard coming in. And so LSU is kind of an interesting one to me because I think when you look at it, it's going to be a fine line that Brian Kelly has to toe here. If he is interested in Caleb Williams, I do think the question becomes, do you want to take him and piss off this kid Walker Howard that's committed? Walker Howard's from Louisiana. You're new to Louisiana, Brian Kelly. You come in, and the first week you're on the job, not the first week, but the first month you're on the job, you recruit right over a 5-star kid from Louisiana? Might make it hard to recruit in Louisiana. So I think that's a push-pull that Brian Kelly has to consider, and I think Caleb Williams has to consider it as well because LSU's just, bare bones right now in terms of scholarship players. They're down to 39 players for this bowl game. And then, oh, by the way, let's not forget that on top of that, they right now have a very small 2022 recruiting class because their recruiting class went in a million different directions after Coach O was fired. So I don't know that they have a national championship caliber team either at LSU. Last kind of SEC team that I think of is the Florida Gators. Billy Napier, new to the SEC. Nobody knows much about him. You know how you make a splash if you're Billy Napier? You go out and you get Caleb Williams, one of the top high school quarterbacks in recent history. All of a sudden, bing, bang, boom, Billy Napier just showed the whole SEC, hey, I ain't here to play. Now, I will say the negative with Billy Napier in Florida is the same with Brian Kelly and LSU, which is, and by the way, that was weird saying Brian Kelly and LSU. The weird part is the idea that if you take Caleb Williams, the guy that's projected to be a starter next year for you, Billy Napier, at Florida, is a kid named Anthony Richardson, who is not only from Florida, he's from Gainesville. So you talk about pissing off the locals right away. That's one way to do it real quick, Billy Napier. And so I think there's a delicate push-pull balance there. But then again, if you bring in Caleb Williams to a school that is used to competing for national championships, that is used to having fun offenses under Steve Spurrier, under Urban Meyer, with Danny Werfel, with Tim Tebow, I think you got to consider it if you're Billy Napier. A couple other schools, I will say, Brandon Huffman, really good recruiting writer. He referenced UCLA, and we're going to get to UCLA because they had a kid named Dylan Gabriel committed. Dylan Gabriel ain't committed no more, and we'll get to him in a second. And they need a starting quarterback. How interesting would it be if UCLA got in the mix, of course, and Caleb Williams went there and was competing against, Lincoln Riley in town every year going forward. Oregon, I think, is going to need a quarterback. They took Bo Nix, but guess what? You got a chance to get Caleb Williams. You push Bo Nix aside and say, good luck. Good luck at wherever, but we got to go get Caleb Williams. And so I think there's other schools, but this is fascinating. And the final thing I would say about this Caleb Williams thing, and this is the most interesting part. I did a quick reaction on YouTube on Monday immediately following the news, and I said, I actually think the most likely possibility amongst all of this is that Caleb Williams actually goes back to Oklahoma. If you saw when Caleb Williams made his announcement that he wants to transfer, that he's considering transferring, he said returning to Oklahoma is absolutely a possibility. Remember, he played in the bowl game. On top of that, he went to Oklahoma basketball games during the break. And so I think there was a belief at Oklahoma that he was planning on staying. It's worth noting, by the way, a couple guys pulled out of the transfer portal believing that Caleb Williams was returning. Theo Wees, who was one of their top wide receivers in 2020, he was banged up for most of 2021, pulled his name out of the portal thinking that Caleb Williams was coming back. So to me, I actually think that the best spot for him probably would have been Oklahoma because remember, yes, they're bringing in a defensive-minded coach in Brent Venables, but they also brought in an offensive coordinator named Jeff Lebby who worked under Lane Kiffin the last few years. And so when Brent Venables made that hire, it was clear that he was basically sitting there saying to himself, look, I got to get somebody as my offensive coordinator that can convince Caleb Williams to stay. And so I actually thought the most logical landing spot for Caleb Williams was going to be to just actually stay at Oklahoma. But then a funny thing happened from there. Did you see what happened on Monday night? Dylan Gabriel, who played at Central Florida, who actually was coached by Jeff Lebby, the guy I just mentioned, the new Oklahoma offensive coordinator. He was committed to go to UCLA, out of the portal, start his career at Central Florida, commits to go to UCLA. He's from Hawaii. Everyone thinks, he's going back to the West Coast. He announces on Monday night that he's not going to UCLA, and he's going to Oklahoma. And so I bring it up because that is a fascinating plot twist. I thought Caleb Williams was going to go back to Oklahoma. I really did. But now they take another quarterback. And I'll just tell you this. This is my last thought, and then we'll wrap and we'll get on to some other stuff. But I bring it up because I am just telling you, what is so fascinating to me about this is this shows you the new world of college football that we currently live in. For years, we've wanted all these players to have all these rights, and they got them. One-time transfer rule, NIL, etc. And it's good. I'm not complaining. As I just said a minute ago, I think Caleb Williams made the right decision by going to see what his options are. But you know who else now is starting to sit back and say, well, wait a second now. All these kids got options. We got to protect ourselves too. It's the coaches. It's the coaches because the Oklahoma staff was sitting there saying, Caleb, we love you. We want you. We want to win a national championship with you right here in Norman. But guess what? We can't sit around and wait for a week because Dylan Gabriel was set to start classes at UCLA, and once he started classes at UCLA, he has to stay at UCLA. And so the Oklahoma staff kind of sat there and said, we can't wait. We got to go. We can't hang on anymore. We can't wait for you, Caleb Williams. And so I find it fascinating that this is now the world that we live in. Yes, all the players have the rights, but guess what? The coaches are sitting there and starting to say, too, wait a second now. We got to protect ourselves. And on top of that, we got to do what's best for our program today because nothing's guaranteed. I look at the situation at Georgia where there's 4 quarterbacks potentially in that room next year, and Kirby Smart may go get another one. You know why? Because if Kirby Smart loses to Alabama next Monday and he gets embarrassed, he knows that clock is ticking again, and he knows that next year he's got to go through Bryce Young. And so Kirby Smart's protecting his own butt by saying, yeah, I like you, Stetson Bennett. I like you, JT Daniels. I like you, Brock Vandagriff. But I got to rock. I got to go get the guy that's best for me. So I find it fascinating because this is the new world that we live in. where not only are players now more empowered than ever, but coaches are protecting their own butts. This is a new world, and it's going to be fascinating to watch. Caleb Williams, again, I would argue the most high-profile transfer that we have had certainly this offseason, maybe since Jalen Hurts, maybe since Justin Fields. I do not know. But this is going to be a fascinating recruitment to watch. And what I would also say is get ready for a decision to come down pretty quick, because I looked it up on Tuesday morning just for fun. This is what Torres does at his free time. USC starts its classes next Monday, January 10th. Georgia starts its classes January 10th. And so because of that, these schools don't have very much time to sit back and wait around.